Welcome back to Jamming in Their Repair YouTube channel. I appreciate you guys watching my stuff, and today is a little bit more of a personal video. I am going to go through each car I've owned and tell a little story about each car, trying to get them into chronological order so I can tell you the history of cars I've owned. A lot of the pictures you see are of the actual cars that I owned, and other pictures are of the same car that I found on the web. So I'll try and tell you which ones are original and actual cars. I'll tell you this much, if it looks like a really nice car, it's probably one that I found off the internet. So each car, I'm going to tell a short little story about it and see how that goes. Someday, I hope to sit down with my granddaughter and watch this video, and we'll laugh at the cars and at the stories, perhaps. And who knows? We'll see how it goes. I think it'll be kind of interesting to have this to pass around or just to reflect on when I'm 87 years old. And I can't quite remember what kind of car that was, what I had in high school, or what was the first truck I ever owned. So far, there's only one truck I've ever owned. I'll tell you that story too. So it's pretty cool stuff. Um, and like I said, it's more for me and nostalgia. And maybe you have your own stories about being with me on some of these cars or in some of these cars. It'll be an interesting journey. So hang out, watch it. I don't think it's going to be a very long video. I think it's going to be an interesting video. And I hope you guys enjoy it. So check it out. We're going to start with the 1972 Ford Pinto. Yep, that was my first car coming up right here. All right, so my first car is a 1972 Ford Pinto with a 1600cc engine in it and a 4-speed manual transmission. The thing had zero power, and I loved every minute of it. I had it for less than a year because the first winter I had it, I drove it into a telephone pole and smashed the front end. I still drove it a little bit after that, but it didn't take long before it just rusted out so bad as it wasn't worth keeping. So I ended up taking it to a junkyard, and and I bought my dad's red Ford Pinto. I think this was a 1976 Ford Pinto with the 2300cc engine in it and a 4-speed. It was way faster than the 1600 my white Pinto was, and way more fun to ride and drive. It was voted the worst car in my high school parking lot for my graduating year of 1982, but I'll tell you this much. I was able to lay a longer burnout with this car than any other car in the parking lot, and I won many a burnout contest with this car. So there, take it. You know, all that rust was weight reduction. Well, it didn't look good, but sure ran good. This one, I ended up rear-ending a car and smashing the hell out of it because I drove it with no brakes. So that's kind of a bummer. Oh well, next car is a 1978, I believe, Ford LTD station wagon with a 400 four-barrel um, engine in it. It used to be Mom's car. Mom got herself a new car, and this one kind of got handed down to me, I guess. And I rode this one through my senior year in high school. And yes, this is the car that I lost my virginity in. Yay, down at Lakefront in Milwaukee. So I'll leave the girl's name off of this video. I'm don't even know where she is these days, but it brings back fond memories, and I love this car. Um, One time I replaced the rear axle. That's a whole different story. So leave a comment. Let me know what you think. I'll tell you the whole story if you want to know. This is a early 70s Fiat, the four-door car. This car would do wheelies, so needless to say, I beat the hell out of it. Only owned it for about 4 months, and I spun a bearing on the um, uh, forgot what the hell you call it, the crankshaft, and I took it to Hewitt's Tire and Auto where I worked at the time, and took the oil pan off, and I tried cleaning the crankshaft with emery cloth and putting it all back together. I drove it maybe 200 miles before that motor blew up. So I had fun in that car. I drove it to the 1982 World Series party on Wisconsin Avenue. I liked that car. I had a lot of fun in that car. This is the next car, a 1976 Ford Pinto, light blue. Nothing special about this car. It's the first car I owned after I moved out of my parents' house. So I had this car sometime around 1983. Um, it was nothing special. It was just a beater that I bombed around, and I think I paid $400 for it or something like that. But it was a real heap of crap. So, um, I had fun. I liked my Pinto cars, and I always took good care of them. So, it is what it is, and we'll move on to the next one. Nothing really special about this car. The next car up is a Plymouth. Um, oh, what the hell is that thing? I don't recall. uh, wasn't a New Yorker. I don't recall. But I bought it for a few $100s. I got ripped off on it. Oh, it's a Plymouth Newport, is what it is. It had a 383 engine in it, and it rode like a boat, and real smooth. But somebody dumped some stuff in the engine to make it quiet long enough for me to buy it. Turned out it had a bad crank on it too. So I only had that one for a few months. So between this and the blue Ford Pinto I just talked about, it was not a good year for cars for me. So this was the first and only Plymouth I ever owned. Bummer. So when all else fails, what do? You go back and buy another Ford Pinto. This time I bought a Ford Pinto station wagon, and I honestly don't remember where I got this one from. If it was a friend of mine or my brother's I don't recall. I love that car. I had this car for a couple of years, I think. Uh, I had a stereo stolen out of it. I had a big speakers. We used to take it down to the lakefront, crank up the music. It was a real loud stereo system in there, and everybody knew that car with the loud music. So maybe that's why I'm deaf today. I don't know. What did you say? What? Anyways, it was a lot of fun. So I enjoyed this car a lot, and if I had a chance, I'd buy another one of these cars. Why not? All right, so this is the 1979 Cougar. I think it was a 79. Could have been a 77. Don't recall. My brother sold me this car extremely cheap, and really like this car. This is the car I owned when I met my wife. On our first date, the throttle cable broke, and I used a screwdriver to jam the choke open or closed so I would have a high idle. High enough that the cruise control would take over and I could drive over to her house. Luckily, when I got there, she said, let's just stay here. She didn't know my car was broken, and I'm sure glad I stayed and had dinner at her house that night. Who knew 2 years later I would marry the woman of my life, and this is the car that brought me to that date. So thank you very much, Dave. I appreciate it. I had a lot of fun with this car. The next car up was a 1982, 81, 82, maybe 83 Mercury Lynx. This came at a time when my dad had a Ford Escort, and Dave had a Ford Escort, and Carol had a Ford Escort. Everybody I knew had a Ford Escort. Pretty much the same car. I bought this car used for $700. I fixed it up really nice. I drove around for, I think, 2 years. Had this car when I got married. And it, I ended up selling it because everybody was cracking the heads on these cars and became kind of expensive repair. And I didn't want to go through the repair, so I sold it for $700. So I thought that was a good deal. I bought it for 700, sold it for 700. Can't ask for much more than that, can you? Then came the 1977 Mercury Comet. I bought this car with the hopes that my wife would get her driver's license back in 1988, the year we got married. And she just was not interested in getting her license. So when I sold the Mercury Lynx, I drove this car around for about a year or two, not very long, and it had its own problems. It had an AM radio only on it, and it's when I started listening to Mark Belling's radio show, um, right around 1988, which was the first year he was on air. So I kind of just remember that car for that fact, and didn't really do anything else with it. Ended up going to the junkyard, I suppose. But I liked that car. Had a good time. All right, this was a 1982 Renault Alliance car. I bought this car from Jerry Pfeiffer back in, I want to say, 89. I drove it for about a year and had some problems with it, and he said I could return it back to him if I wanted. I think I paid him a total of like $600 for the thing. And I took it back and he scrapped it out. I honestly don't remember what happened to this car after that. So nothing special about it. It ran good. And, I remember Jerry Pfeiffer from this car. So that's the only point of interest this Renault brings to me, other than a friend of mine's dad worked for Renault as well. So interesting car, but nothing too special. All right, so I guess I lied earlier. My brother Dave gave me this Plymouth Horizon. It was a real basket case. The rear leaf spring was poking through the floor of this car, and I took it over to our dad's house, and he had an old bed frame, and we took the angle iron from the bed frame and bolted it to the floor, and that's what held the leaf spring in place on this car. Um, I drove this car for about a year or so before I decided to finally go get a nice car from a car dealer. And the next car up is the first, I traded this car in, and it just barely made it to the dealer. So that's the one remembering. Taking that Plymouth Horizon to the dealer with my wife to buy my Mercury Tempo. Uh, the first car I ever had a car payment on. And my wife negotiated for about 3 hours to get the price we wanted on this car. And it was quite the negotiation. It took us, like I said, like 3 hours. And she got what she wanted for this car. And we paid what we paid. And traded in that Plymouth Horizon. And trust me, it didn't start after we got there. That car was done. So I drove this car and outlasted the car payment. So I had this car at least 5 years. And that's all I ever ask is outlast payments. So if you get a car that lasts that long, I think you're doing all right. The next car is a 1993 Mercury Grand Marquis. This is the second car I ever financed with a dealer, and I drove this car 289,000 miles before the engine finally blew up on me. I donated it to Rawhide. It's the car I owned when we moved up to Ripon in 1988. And I really liked that car. It served me well. Had air ride. That car was fancy. Digital dash for the day. Really hated to see it go. So that's all right. We all move on. And this is one of my favorite cars, the Mercury Grand Marquis. Maybe that's why I've owned like four of them. So there you go. My brother Dave gave me this truck after I moved up to Ripon in 1988. This is 1998. This is the truck I took my wife on our honeymoon with. We towed my brother's pop-up camper to Wisconsin Dells, and it was the first time my wife ever went camping in a camper. And some years later, Dave sold it to me, and it rusted out was the problem. And I was just using it to haul dirt back and forth and junk, from the house we had just bought and all that sort of stuff. And it sat in the garage for many, many years, and I had the brake lines were all rotted out and whatnot. And that's the main reason I got rid of it. It's just the rust was horrendous. Uh, Again, I donate all my vehicles to Rawhide. Um, and this is where that one went. And it probably just went to the scrap pile. But I enjoyed this truck. It had a lot of memories. And Dave really enjoyed this truck. And my brother Dave's always given me a lot of vehicles over the years. And I do appreciate that very much. Next up was the 1998 Mercury Grand Marquis. I owned this car again 6 or 7 years, and it was a good working car, and it too died just short of 300,000 miles. So to this point, I've never driven a car more than 300,000 miles. And yeah, it's kind of a bummer. I like this car too. Of course, I like the Grand Marquis. I drive a lot of miles a year. I put on 40, 50,000 miles a year. I figured, what the heck? I may as well be comfortable while I'm driving all those miles. And the Grand Marquis was always a good car for comfort driving. Gas mileage wasn't the best, but hey, you gotta sacrifice something for comfort. So another Grand Marquis, here you go. All right, this was an early 1990s Ford Contour car. It was Debbie's first car, and she loved that car. She drove it into a ditch in winter and got stuck, and spun the tire so much she fried the transmission on the car, and the car repairs for the transmission being a front wheel drive was over $3,000, and the car just wasn't worth $3,000 to repair. But she loved that car, and it was a shame to see it go. So, like all things, you gotta move on. And she got her driver's license when she was 44 years old. So, finally talked her into it. Moving to Ripon had a lot to do with it, since she needed a car to go anywhere up here. All right, I bought this Saab, and I honestly don't remember the year of it. I got it free from one of my customers, and she was going to take it to the scrap yard because it had a really bad fuel line leak on it. And I said, well, I'll take it off your hands. And I did some extra computer work for her for free. So she got a few bucks. And then I fixed it up, And I sold it back to her for $800 because it was nostalgic for her. It was the last car her deceased husband owned. And she was really glad I fixed it up and got it running. So it was an interesting car. It was a 4-speed and a fun car to drive. And I'll tell you, a lot of polishing went into that car, and it turned out really nice. And so she was glad to have it back. Um, my first Saab car. Interesting. All right, the next one up was a 2002, I think it was. Another Mercury Grand Marquis. That's my wife on the left and my daughter-in-law on the right. On Halloween, when we had our camper at I think that was Kilby Lake Campground we were at the time. Nothing special about this car. My wife drove it in a ditch and tore up the front end. We had that repaired. And then I drove it into a ditch and tore it up again. And that time it wasn't worth repairing. I hit a brush, some scrub in the ditch, and it just tore it all apart. So, bummer, insurance paid me. That was the first insurance claim I ever put on a car. It was totaled by the insurance company. So, there I go, the last of the Mercury Grand Marquis. Well, I got this Lincoln Town Car from a friend of mine for free. He was moving and he had to get it out of his yard. And I took it, the body was in pretty good shape, but it sat for a year in some grass, and the car ended up being a money pit. I spent about almost $2,000 fixing this thing. My brother Dave helped me replace a heater core in it, which took us all day. And the thing just kept falling apart till I finally decided to donate it to the Rawhide car, kids. And it was a nice car, but boy, I spent way more money on it, and it just I never got to put the miles I thought I'd like to put onto it. So, oh well, you live and learn. All right, this is my wife's second car. It is a 2014 Ford Focus. I bought this car for $9,000. It is a basic car. There is nothing special about this car. It doesn't have any tinted windows. It doesn't have any cup holders. It doesn't have power windows. You actually have cranks. Well, it has power windows in the front and crank windows in the back. So this is a stripped down base model for her, and she just loves it. It reminds her of that red Contour that she had when she first got her license. It's a nice small car, easy for her to drive and handle. And she puts on about 4,000 miles a year. So I think we're going to have this car for quite a number of years to come. And, well, that brings us up to present day. The next car I'll show you is the car I'm driving every day currently. All right, I'm going to finish this video on a cold February day. It's 11 degrees outside, so my car is filthy dirty. This is a 2009 Ford Taurus. I've had for 7 years now, and it's probably the best car I've ever owned. As far as rust goes, it's fairly free of rust, if you can believe it, with all the salt that's on this thing. Holy mackerels. Well, all the car washes are closed. It's 11 degrees outside, and I want to finish this video, so I'm going to do it with a dirty car. So that's the history of my cars up until February. Hope you enjoyed it. And this car has 299,000 miles on it. Let me see here. There we go. 296,000. So this might be the first car I hit 200,000 miles on. So thanks for watching. This again is more for me than it is for you. And many years from now, this video would be enjoyable to watch. Have a good day. Bye-bye.